Hello, and welcome to The Sleepy Mind. Tonight, we are going to sit with one of the most quietly extraordinary objects the human imagination has ever produced. Not a building, not a story, not an invention in the usual sense of the word. Something smaller than any of those things, and in many ways more enduring. A circle with a center. A world drawn inward from its edges. A shape so old and so instinctive that it has appeared independently in nearly every culture that has ever gathered people together and asked them to reach towards something larger than themselves. The mandala is not quite a painting and not quite a map. It is not quite a prayer, and it is not quite a diagram. It is all of these things, and none of them precisely. It can take years to create and be destroyed in an afternoon. It can be drawn in sand and swept into a river. It can be a window of colored glass in a cathedral, a spider's web in the early morning, the cross-section of a tree that fell before your grandmother was born. And it can be this, a still point, a center to return to. A form that the human eye and the human mind seem to recognize before they have been told what they are looking at. If these quiet journeys are something you find yourself returning to, I would love for you to like this video or subscribe to The Sleepy Mind. It helps more tired and curious people find their way here, one gentle night at a time. But now, there is nothing to do. Let your body settle into wherever it is resting. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breathing slow, just slightly, just naturally, until it finds its own quiet rhythm. We are going to the center. Let's begin. The word arrived long before most of the things it would come to describe. It moved through centuries of practice, across mountain passes and monsoon forests, and the slow, patient migrations of human thought, before it accumulated the weight of everything it would eventually hold. The word is Mandala. It comes from Sanskrit, one of the oldest documented languages of South Asia, a tongue so carefully tended and preserved that scholars can read texts composed more than 3,000 years ago as clearly as pages printed yesterday. In Sanskrit, the word means, at its most direct, circle or disk. A shape so elemental, so immediately available to any eye that has ever watched water ripple outward from a dropped stone, that it barely seems to require a name. And yet this particular name has endured in uninterrupted use for millennia. It has passed through dozens of languages and hundreds of traditions, been inscribed on stone and painted on silk and whispered in monastic hallways at hours when the rest of the world was sleeping. It has been used to describe painted diagrams and sand constructions and sacred ground plans and the interior architecture of the human mind. It is a word that has refused, across all that time, to stop being useful. But Sanskrit, like all ancient languages, carries more meaning inside a single word than translation easily recovers. The word mandala can be understood as two roots joined. Manda, meaning essence, and la, which indicates a container, or that which holds something. Some scholars, attending to this etymology with particular care, have translated the word not as circle, but as container of essence, a vessel for what is most central, a form built not simply to enclose, but to preserve what is held at its heart. That understanding lives quietly inside the word itself, and it shapes everything the mandala has become across its long history. A circle, considered on its own, is nothing more than a line that curves back to meet itself, a closed path with no beginning and no end. And yet the mandala, as it has been understood across every culture that has ever worked with it, is never simply a circle. It is a circle organized around a point, a form that moves inward as much as it moves outward, a shape that implies, by its very geometry, that the center matters, that wherever the eye travels across the surface, there is always something it will eventually return to. This distinction is not a small one. Much of human geometry tends outward. Roads extend toward horizons. Rivers widen toward the sea. The ambitions of cities push outward toward their edges. The mandala is one of the rare geometric forms that insists on the opposite direction. It draws inward. It says that the center is not merely the point from which things radiate, but the thing toward which all other things move. It is, in this sense, as much a philosophical statement as it is a visual form. In the broadest and most generous understanding of the term, any diagram or sacred object organized around a center point, radiating outward with symmetry, can be described as a mandala. This definition is wide enough to include not only the intricate painted scrolls of Tibetan Vajrayana Buddhism and the abstract geometric yantras of Hindu practice, but also the rose windows of medieval Gothic cathedrals, the ceremonial sand paintings of Navajo healing ceremony, the web of an orb weaver spider shining with morning dew, and the silica shell of a single-celled diatom floating in a cold northern lake. The form, as this generosity as definition begins to suggest, is older and more widely distributed than any single tradition that has ever claimed it. Mandalas have functioned in religious and contemplative life in several ways at once, often operating in the same object at the same moment. They serve as focal points for meditation, objects whose complexity and radial symmetry can anchor a wandering mind and draw it inward by gentle degrees, the eye following the pattern toward the center, the way a leaf on slow water is carried toward the current. They function as cosmological maps, diagrams of the universe as understood by a particular tradition, with the center of the mandala corresponding to the center of reality itself, the point from which all things originate and to which all things return. They serve as ritual spaces, sacred enclosures that mark a zone of practice and intention, making the invisible visible by giving it edges. And in many traditions, they function as instruments for visualization, allowing a practitioner to build an entire interior world in the mind by studying and absorbing a visual structure until the image is no longer something seen on a surface, but something inhabited from within. In the liturgical language of Theravada Buddhism, the ancient Indian language called Pali, which has been maintained with extraordinary care for over 2,000 years in an unbroken chain of teachers and students, the word mandala refers to a ceremonially prepared ground or sacred space for ritual activity. The term carries a practical meaning alongside its symbolic resonance. It names not only the diagram, but the space within which practice happens. The circle, in this sense, is not only something drawn on a surface, it is something a practitioner enters, occupies, and works within. What is quietly remarkable about the mandala, considered across all of its forms and all of the traditions that have worked with it, is that it seems to do the same essential thing regardless of where it appears. It offers the wandering mind a place to land, a shape so organized and so complete in itself that the eye, following its structure, naturally slows. The mind, given a center to return to, releases its restless movement from thought to thought, and settles into something that resembles stillness. The mandala does not instruct. It does not argue or explain or make a case for itself. It simply arranges the world into a form that the human nervous system seems, quite spontaneously, to find restful. That this should be so is worth sitting with for a moment. Not all shapes produce this quality. Not all images carry, in the body of their observer, this particular quietening. But the mandala, with its center and its rings and its reliable symmetry, seems to carry it as an inherent property. Something in the form itself is already doing the work before any understanding of its meaning has arrived. How that shape came to occupy so much of human sacred history, how it spread from one tradition to the next and appeared independently in places that had never been in contact, is a question that requires stepping back a very long way into the oldest layers of recorded civilization, into the Sanskrit texts of an ancient subcontinent, into the first careful attempts of the human imagination to draw what the universe looked like from the inside. The earliest known textual use of the word mandala does not appear in a religious text, or not in the way one might expect. It appears in the Rig Veda, a collection of sacred hymns composed in what is now the northwest of the Indian subcontinent, over a long period stretching from approximately 1500 to 1200 years before the Common Era. The Rig Veda is one of the oldest surviving bodies of human literature, a collection of more than 1,000 hymns composed in archaic Sanskrit and preserved across 4,000 years through an oral tradition of such precision that modern scholars can still reconstruct the pronunciation of its original verses. The Rig Veda is organized into 10 books, and each of those books is called a mandala. Not a diagram, not a cosmological map, not a painted image on cloth or plaster. Each is called a mandala in the sense of a contained and ordered collection of sacred material, a circle drawn around a body of knowledge to hold it together, to give it edges, to say, this is what belongs here, and this is where it ends. The word, at its oldest recorded use, was already doing something characteristic. It was containing, organizing, centering. Buddhist mandalas grew out of this older tradition of Hindu cosmological diagrams and reached their most elaborate and systematically developed form in Vajrayana Buddhism, the esoteric tradition that emerged in northern India and began to spread northward and eastward from approximately the 4th and 5th centuries of the Common Era. The journey from the relatively flat, abstract cosmograms of early Indian practice to the architecturally complex, multiply-layered painted mandalas of Tibet was a long one, shaped by centuries of commentary and visualization practice, and the gradual accumulation of teachings that expanded the mandala tradition in successive waves of elaboration. Among the earliest surviving visual mandalas are paintings preserved in the Ajanta caves of Maharashtra in western India, carved from a horseshoe-shaped cliff above a river whose sound, in quieter centuries, must have carried through the carved chambers like the sound of something continuous and unhurried. These caves, created over a period stretching from the 2nd century before the Common Era through the 6th century of the Common Era, contain frescoes and sculptures of remarkable preservation, including early Buddhist compositions whose basic circular geometry anticipates what would become, centuries later, the great painted mandalas of Tibet. The mandala did not stay in India. It traveled the way ideas travel when they are carried by people who believe they matter. Along the Silk Road, those long overland and maritime trade routes connecting the Mediterranean world to China, mandalas moved with monks and manuscripts, with sacred objects packed into the luggage of those making pilgrimages from one tradition to another. Between approximately the 6th and 12th centuries of the Common Era, the mandala form spread from India into Central Asia, into China, into Korea and Japan, and into the Himalayan regions of Tibet and Nepal, where it would find its most elaborate and systematically developed expression. Each culture through which the mandala passed absorbed it according to its own aesthetic and philosophical sensibilities. In China, where brush painting had developed a vocabulary of line and wash, unlike anything in the Indian tradition, mandalas were rendered with the fluid precision characteristic of Chinese Buddhist art. In Japan, where a refined aesthetic sensibility governed every form of visual production, the mandala was given a delicacy and a formal elegance that distinguished it from its South Asian origins while remaining faithful to its essential structure. The journey to Japan was particularly well documented because of a single remarkable individual, the monk Kukai, who would later be known by the honorary posthumous title Kobo Daishi, meaning the Grand Master who spread the Dharma, traveled to the Tang dynasty capital of Chang'an in the year 804 of the Common Era, specifically to study under the Master Huiguo, the foremost teacher of esoteric Buddhist practice in China at that time. Kukai spent months studying under Huiguo before the teacher died, but in those months he received initiations, texts, and mandalas, physical painted scrolls, carrying the visual transmission of an entire esoteric Buddhist lineage. When Kukai returned to Japan, he brought these mandalas with him as central instruments of teaching, not merely as beautiful objects or illustrations of doctrine, but as primary transmissions of the Dharma, the Buddhist teachings, in a form that language alone could not provide. He is recorded as explaining that the truths of the esoteric tradition were too subtle to be conveyed through words alone, and that the painted mandalas were therefore essential. They communicated at a register deeper than words could reach, transmitting through visual structure and sacred geometry what no text could quite say directly. This was not an unusual view within the traditions that cultivated the mandala most deeply. Across many Buddhist and Hindu lineages, the mandala was never understood as a mere depiction of something that existed independently of it, a simple illustration of a cosmological truth that could equally well be described in prose. It was understood as a form of direct transmission, as an object in which the reality it represented was, in some sense, actually present. To see the mandala with adequate preparation and understanding was to be, in a limited but real way, inside the world it described. To study it deeply enough was to begin to inhabit that world, rather than simply observe it. As the mandala traveled across cultures and centuries, it absorbed local artistic vocabularies, adapted its iconography to local deities and local traditions of color and line, and grew more elaborate in some places and more abstract in others. But its essential geometry remained consistent: a center, radiating structure, a containing boundary. The same answer, arrived at independently by communities separated by thousands of miles and centuries of time, to the question of how to make something sacred and concentrated, something that would hold its meaning at the center and not let it dissolve at the edges. That consistency is itself worth sitting with, not necessarily as evidence of a single origin, but of something more interesting. The possibility that this particular arrangement of a center and its emanations corresponds to something real about how the human mind organizes experience, how attention seeks a focal point, how the eye wants, given a surface to explore, to find something to return to. The history of the mandala is, among other things, a long record of that impulse, traced across cultures and centuries in paint and sand and stone, and the colored light of medieval glass. And to understand what the mandala does across all of those forms, it helps to understand, in some detail, what it actually looks like, what its structure is, what the world inside the circle contains. There is, in a traditional Tibetan Buddhist mandala, a particular quality of completeness that becomes visible only slowly, the longer one looks. Not the completeness of a picture that shows everything at once, the way a painted landscape reveals itself immediately to any passing eye, but the completeness of a world that has been thought all the way through. Every ring, every gate, every color and gesture and placement has a reason. Nothing has been added for decoration and nothing left out for convenience. The mandala, as an object, is as close to a world without remainder as the human imagination has managed to produce. The structure of a classical Tibetan Buddhist mandala is organized from the outside inward in a series of concentric rings and enclosures that function something like the walls and courtyards of a sacred city approached from a great distance. The outermost ring is a ring of fire, rendered in swirls of orange and red and gold. This is not fire as destruction. It is fire as transformation, the zone through which the practitioner must conceptually pass in order to enter the mandala's world, and in passing through which ignorance is understood to be converted into wisdom. The fire announces that what lies inside is different from what lies outside. Within the ring of fire sits a ring of Vajra symbols. Vajra is a Sanskrit word carrying two meanings simultaneously. Thunderbolt, the most powerful natural force visible to the ancient world, and diamond, the hardest natural substance known. The Vajra ring surrounds the mandala's inner palace with a quality of indestructibility, suggesting that what the mandala contains cannot be damaged or diminished by anything in the ordinary world. The symbols are arranged in an unbroken sequence, each one joined to the next until the circle is complete. The third ring, moving inward, is typically a ring of lotus petals. The lotus, which grows from muddy water and opens into an immaculate flower at the surface, is one of the most enduring symbols in both Hindu and Buddhist traditions. Its appearance at this threshold is not accidental. It marks the boundary between the outer rings, which speak of transformation and indestructibility, and the inner enclosure, which speaks of purity. The practitioner, conceptually crossing this threshold, leaves behind ordinary conditioned existence and enters a space understood as inherently free from defilement. The inner enclosure is a square. This square represents a palace, a sacred architectural structure with 4 gates, one opening onto each of the 4 cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west. These gates are typically rendered in the shape of T-forms, a design that mirrors the actual architectural style of ceremonial gates found in Buddhist monastery complexes across Asia, as though the sacred palace inside the mandala and the physical buildings of the living tradition share a common blueprint, the outer world and the inner world rhyming with each other in stone and paint. The 4 directions encoded in the mandala's gates correspond to 4 dimensions of experience, 4 aspects of enlightened mind, and 4 of the 5 Buddha families that organize much of Vajrayana iconography. Between the gates, the outer walls of the inner palace are often decorated with symbols of abundance and welcome. The palace is not a fortress. Its gates face outward. Its ornaments express generosity. What it contains is offered to those who have prepared themselves to receive it. At the absolute center of the mandala sits what is called the heart, the seat of the principal deity, symbol, or the luminous point that represents the practice's ultimate object. It is from this center that everything else in the mandala radiates, and it is toward this center that all of the mandala's structure ultimately points. The center is not simply the middle of a circle, it is the source, the axis around which the entire symbolic universe of the mandala is organized, the still point from which all movement emanates and to which all movement is understood to return. The colors used in traditional Tibetan Buddhist mandalas are never arbitrary. Each of the 5 directions, including the center itself, corresponds to a specific color, an element, a sense faculty, and a particular quality of enlightened awareness. White corresponds to the east and to the wisdom of mirror-like awareness, the mind that reflects all phenomena without distortion or preference. Yellow corresponds to the south and the wisdom of equanimity, which meets all experience with the same steady quality of recognition. Red corresponds to the west and the wisdom of discernment, which distinguishes clearly without becoming entangled in what it distinguishes. Green corresponds to the north and the wisdom of all accomplishing action, the capacity to respond to whatever arises without hesitation or resistance. Deep blue or black corresponds to the center and to the wisdom of ultimate reality, the awareness that is already present beneath the movement of all other qualities. A practitioner who has learned these correspondences can read a mandala the way a navigator reads a chart, each element confirming a position within a larger landscape of meaning. The entire image, a precision instrument for orienting the mind within the territory of its own experience. Many mandalas are organized on a system of 4s and 8s, 4 directions, 4 gates, 8 petals of the central lotus, 8 directions of space when the diagonal directions are added to the cardinal ones. The number 4 appears so consistently across mandala traditions that some scholars have proposed it reflects a deep structural tendency in human spatial cognition, a natural disposition to organize the world into quarters that the body's own directional experience provides. The 4 directions that any standing human body generates simply by having a front and a back, a left and a right. Whether or not this is so, the mandala's geometry encodes a worldview in which the universe is orderly, complete, and exhaustively accounted for. Nothing is left outside. None of this is arrived at quickly in the life of a practitioner. A mandala is not an image to be glanced at and understood in the way one might take in a landscape at a single look. It is an image to be entered slowly, studied across years, until its geography becomes interior rather than exterior, and the practitioner can reconstruct it in the mind with the same vividness and clarity that one might reconstruct a room one has lived in for decades. This kind of internalization is, in many traditions, the purpose of the mandala's visual elaborateness. The complexity is not ornamentation. It is a curriculum, a structured program for training the mind to hold an increasingly precise and detailed interior world. And it is precisely because the mandala is so complete and so painstakingly constructed that a particular tradition of mandala practice carries such extraordinary weight. The tradition in which monks pour an entire world into existence, grain by grain, over the course of many days, with full knowledge that they will pour it just as deliberately away. In Vajrayana Buddhism, the esoteric tradition that developed in India and found its fullest expression in Tibet, the mandala is not primarily an aesthetic object. It is not made to be looked at from the outside the way one looks at a painting in a gallery, standing at a respectful distance with the composition at arm's length. It is made to be entered, made to be inhabited, made in the fullest sense of a practice that can extend across an entire lifetime to be become. This understanding that the mandala is a world a practitioner can enter and ultimately identify with underlies one of the central practices of Vajrayana Buddhism, a practice known as deity yoga. In deity yoga, the practitioner uses a mandala as the foundation for a detailed visualization, mentally dissolving the ordinary sense of self and entering the mandala at its outer edge, moving through its rings and gates according to a specific sequence described in the texts associated with that particular mandala. Step by step, the practitioner moves inward through the fire ring and the Vajra ring and the lotus ring and the gates of the palace until arriving at the center where the principal deity resides. There, rather than remaining an observer, the practitioner identifies with the central deity, assuming that deity's form, perspective, and qualities as a method for cultivating those same qualities within their own mind. This practice is considered one of the most powerful and most demanding in the entire Vajrayana tradition. It requires years of preparatory training, a formal empowerment from a qualified teacher, and the sustained commitment to a daily practice that can take hours to perform. But it rests on a relatively simple and remarkable idea that by repeatedly rehearsing in the mind a way of being in the world, one can, over time, genuinely change the way one is in the world. The mandala provides the map. The practice provides the journey. The destination is a change in the practitioner's relationship to their own experience that cannot quite be described from the outside, but that those who have undertaken it consistently describe as worth the effort. One mandala stands above almost all others in terms of complexity and significance within the Vajrayana tradition. The Kalachakra Mandala, whose name translates from Sanskrit as Wheel of Time, is an intricate construction containing over 700 deities arranged within its concentric enclosures, each one corresponding to a specific aspect of the cosmological, psychological, and astrological system that the Kalachakra teachings describe. The Kalachakra Mandala does not describe a single deity's pure land or a single teaching's symbolic landscape. It describes the entire universe as that tradition understands it, organized around a single luminous center. The Kalachakra empowerment, the formal ceremony through which a teacher transmits the authorization to practice with the Kalachakra Mandala, is one of the most significant ritual events in Tibetan Buddhist life. The Dalai Lama, the spiritual leader of the Gelug school of Tibetan Buddhism, has given the Kalachakra initiation publicly many times across several decades in India and in Europe and in North America, to gatherings that have numbered in the tens of thousands of people. These public empowerments are understood as a means of planting a positive seed in the minds of even those who are not prepared to undertake the full practice, introducing through the ceremony's concentrated blessings a quality that might flower across future lifetimes. Tibetan mandalas are most commonly encountered in painted form on thangkas, scroll paintings made of cloth or silk that are mounted on decorative brocade borders for ritual use and display. A thangka is not simply a painting. It is a consecrated object, understood within the tradition as a residence for the deity depicted, a physical support around which the deity's presence can gather in a form accessible to human perception. Thangkas are traditionally stored rolled inside their brocade mountings when not in use, displayed for practice and ceremony, and handled with the care appropriate to sacred objects. A single thangka mandala of significant complexity may take months or years to complete. The artists who create them work within strict iconometric guidelines that have been developed and refined across centuries of practice. Guidelines governing not only the overall composition of the mandala, but the precise proportions, gestures, color choices, and ornamentation of every figure within it. A figure whose proportions are even slightly incorrect is understood not simply as an aesthetic failure, but as a doctrinal one. The image will not accurately represent what it is meant to represent, and the practice supported by it will therefore be compromised. The training required to paint thangkas traditionally includes years of preliminary study covering iconometry, symbolism, and meditative practice before a student is considered qualified to undertake significant commissioned work. The Norbalinka Institute in Dharamsala, in northern India, is one of a number of institutions that have worked in recent decades to preserve this training as a living art form, ensuring that the skills necessary to create accurate and powerful thangka mandalas continue to be transmitted to new generations of artists, even as the political conditions that drove Tibetan Buddhist culture from its homeland have made this preservation a matter of considerable urgency. What the thangka mandala and the practices associated with it ask of both artist and practitioner is a quality of sustained, precise, and fully engaged attention that most people rarely bring to anything. Every brushstroke makes a claim about the nature of reality. Every color placement reflects a decision with doctrinal weight. The mandala, as a painted object, is a collaboration between centuries of accumulated teaching and the particular hands and eyes of a single artist working in a particular room on a particular morning. That the resulting object is sometimes beautiful in the most ordinary sense of the word seems almost incidental to the seriousness of the undertaking. And yet the most serious form of mandala practice in the Vajrayana tradition is not the one executed with brushes on cloth. It is the one created in sand, in full knowledge that it will be swept away. There is something about watching a sand mandala being created that slows time in an unusual way. Not the dramatic slowing of great events, not the suspended quality of crisis or grief, but something gentler than either of those things. The slowing that comes when the eye settles on something that requires patience to make and patience to observe. Something that cannot be hurried without being destroyed. The sand mandala, known in Tibetan as kilkor, a word that can be translated roughly as that which is encircled, is among the most intricate and time-intensive ritual art forms in the Vajrayana Buddhist tradition. It is created by trained monks who apply millions of individual grains of dyed sand to a flat surface through metal funnels called chakpur, narrow conical instruments whose vibration, when the monks rub them together, causes the sand to flow from their tips in controlled amounts that can be placed with a precision that the hands alone could not achieve. The sand used in traditional Tibetan mandala creation was historically produced from powdered precious and semi-precious stones. Lapis lazuli for the deep blues, malachite for the greens, coral for the reds and oranges. The resulting colors were extraordinary in their saturation, colors that seemed to generate their own light from within. Today, specially dyed sand is used in most contemporary preparations, producing vivid colors that honor the tradition's aesthetic requirements while making the practice financially accessible in a way that powdered gemstones would not allow. The construction of a large sand mandala typically requires a team of 4 or more monks working in carefully coordinated collaboration. Each monk takes responsibility for one quadrant of the composition, working outward from the center in a sequence governed by the textual guidelines for that particular mandala. The process unfolds across a period of between 4 and 14 days of continuous daily work, the monks sitting or kneeling around the mandala table for hours at a time, their faces close to the surface, their hands steady, their attention unwavering. The work does not begin with color, it begins with geometry. Before a single grain of sand is placed, the monks draw precise guidelines across the entire surface of the mandala table, using rulers and compasses and lengths of string coated with chalk or colored powder, marking out the exact positions of the rings, the gates, the palace walls, and the central chamber. This preliminary drawing is itself a practice requiring expertise and care, because any error in the foundational geometry will compound itself as the composition builds outward, and the cumulative effect of small inaccuracies can distort the entire mandala. The guidelines are the skeleton. Everything that follows depends on their precision. Monks who work on sand mandalas undergo years of dedicated training before they are considered prepared to contribute to a major ceremonial mandala. The training covers not only the technical skills of sand application, but the doctrinal knowledge necessary to understand what is being built, the identity of each deity, the significance of each color, the meaning of each gesture and attribute, and spatial relationship. A monk working on a sand mandala is not simply placing colored sand in designated areas. The monk is, in a sense, building the world the mandala describes, and that requires knowing what that world contains. Upon the completion of the sand mandala, a consecration ceremony takes place that marks the formal conclusion of the creative phase and the beginning of the ritual activation of the work. The monks chant prayers in the presence of the completed mandala, perform ritual music using traditional instruments, and invite the blessings and presence associated with the mandala's principal deity to gather in the physical form they have constructed. The mandala, which has been built through the sustained physical effort of skilled practitioners, is understood at this moment as fully alive, a meeting point between the ordinary material world and the extraordinary world it has been made to represent. And then, after the consecration ceremony, the mandala is dismantled. The deconstruction is not hasty or careless. It is performed with the same deliberateness that characterized the creation. The monks use small brushes or implements to sweep the sand from the outermost rings inward toward the center, collapsing the image systematically, allowing the colors to merge and blur as the weeks of careful work are undone in a single ceremony. The resulting mixture, all the colors of the mandala combined into a uniform gray-brown, is gathered at the center, transferred to a vessel, and carried in procession to a nearby river or body of moving water, where it is poured in with prayers and intention, releasing the mandala's blessings to flow outward into the wider world through the movement of the water. The deliberate destruction of the completed sand mandala is understood within the Vajrayana tradition as one of the most direct teachings available on impermanence, a quality the Buddhist tradition calls anicca in Pali, the recognition that all composite things, all things built from parts, all things that came into being through causes and conditions, will inevitably cease. The sand mandala embodies this truth with a visceral clarity that no verbal teaching can quite equal. Weeks of extraordinary care, of sustained and precise attention, of the accumulated skill of years of training, and the result is swept away in an afternoon. Not reluctantly, not as an unfortunate necessity, deliberately and with full attention. For practitioners and observers alike, witnessing the destruction of a completed sand mandala is described as one of the most instructive teachings on non-attachment available in living Buddhist practice. The beauty is undeniable, the loss is undeniable, and the response that the practice invites, not of suppression of feeling, but of meeting the feeling fully and then releasing it along with the sand, is precisely the quality of mind that decades of meditation practice point toward. The mandala teaches it in an afternoon, and it carries that lesson down the river and out into the world. That same understanding of impermanence, approached through a different vocabulary and a different set of sacred forms, has been present in the Hindu traditions that gave rise to Buddhism. And it is to those traditions and their own particular relationship with the sacred circle that attention now moves. In Hindu tradition, the sacred geometric diagram used for meditation and ritual tends to go by a different name. It is more commonly called a yantra, a Sanskrit word derived from a root meaning instrument or device, something that does work, something that accomplishes an effect through its very form. The distinction between mandala and yantra is not absolute, and the terms sometimes overlap in ways that scholars note without always resolving. But in general terms, the yantra is the Hindu instrument, and the mandala is the Buddhist one, even as both belong to the same deep current of South Asian sacred geometry from which they both emerged. A yantra tends toward abstraction in a way that many Buddhist mandalas do not. Where a Tibetan Buddhist mandala might be filled with the vivid figurative imagery of deities, palaces, gates, and gardens, a yantra is typically composed of triangles, circles, petals, and the single luminous point at the center from which everything radiates. There are no faces in a yantra, no hands, no attributes, no narrative imagery, only the pure relationships of geometric forms, each one encoding a specific aspect of the deity or principle the yantra represents, without the mediation of figurative art. The Sri Yantra is, by any measure, the most celebrated of all Hindu sacred diagrams, and one of the most geometrically sophisticated objects in the entire history of sacred art. It is composed of 9 interlocking triangles radiating from a central point, 4 pointing upward and 5 pointing downward. These 9 triangles, when they intersect, create precisely 43 smaller triangles, a number arrived at through the geometry of the composition itself, rather than by any external requirement. The Sri Yantra is not drawn, it is derived. The geometry produces its own complexity, the intersections generating triangles that were not placed, but emerged. The 9 original triangles carry a specific symbolic meaning. 5 of them point downward, representing what the tradition calls the feminine or receptive principle, the quality of consciousness that receives and holds. 4 point upward, representing the masculine or active principle, the quality of energy that moves and penetrates. Their intersection is understood as the union of these 2 fundamental cosmic forces, the eternal dynamic that underlies all of manifestation. The Sri Yantra is not a picture of this union. It is this union expressed in the language of pure geometric relationship. At the absolute center of the Sri Yantra and of every yantra sits a point called the Bindu, a Sanskrit word meaning point or drop. The Bindu is understood as the primordial origin before space and time differentiated from each other. The point before points existed, the place where all of creation existed in an undifferentiated potential before the first movement gave rise to form. In meditation practice, the Bindu serves as the ultimate object of concentration. The practitioner brings the attention to the center and holds it there, at the point of origin, in the silence before anything begins. In Hindu temple architecture, the mandala functions not only as an image to be contemplated, but as an architectural blueprint for the physical construction of sacred space. The Vastu Purusha Mandala, a diagram of extraordinary complexity and ancient authority, maps the cosmic being called Purusha, understood as the original conscious entity whose sacrifice gave rise to all of creation, onto the ground plan of a building. The mandala assigns specific qualities and presiding deities to each zone of the building's footprint, from the entrance to the innermost sanctuary, creating a sacred geography that structures the experience of anyone who moves through the space. Many Hindu temples in South India, when viewed from directly above, reveal the precise geometry of a mandala in the layout of their courtyards, sanctuaries, and surrounding walls, the entire complex organized as a concentric series of enclosures, moving inward from the mundane world toward the innermost sanctuary where the primary deity resides. Moving through such a temple is not simply a matter of approaching an altar. It is a movement through successive layers of sacred meaning, each enclosure representing a deepening of the practitioner's relationship with what is being approached. The building is the mandala. The journey through it is the practice. The word Tantra, which designates an important strand of both Hindu and Buddhist esoteric practice that gave rise to some of the most elaborate mandala traditions in either religion, comes from a Sanskrit root meaning to weave. This etymology is more than incidentally revealing. The practice that Tantra describes is precisely a weaving together of mantra, the sacred sound formulas that activate the practitioner's voice, of mandala, the sacred diagrams that provide the visual field, and of ritual gesture, the precise movements of the body that engage the practitioner's physical being in the practice. These three threads are woven together in a single practice that leaves no dimension of the practitioner's experience untouched, working on sound, image, and body simultaneously. The mandala, in this context, is not the whole of the practice, but one of its three essential threads, and it cannot be fully understood in isolation from the other two. What is perhaps most striking about the Hindu sacred diagram tradition, considered alongside the Buddhist one, is how clearly the two draw from the same ancient source: the center and its radiating structure, the concentric enclosures, the correspondence between geometric form and cosmic reality. These are the same ideas, arrived at by the same civilization, expressed in vocabularies that differ in detail while agreeing on everything fundamental. And when those ideas traveled outward from the Indian subcontinent, carried in the minds of monks and architects and artists, they gave rise to something that may be the most remarkable mandala form of all. Buildings the size of mountains, designed from the first stone to be the sacred diagram made physical. There is a moment, standing at the base of Borobudur in central Java, when the scale of the thing becomes clear in a way that does not happen from photographs. The structure rises from the plain in a series of terraces carved from the living rock of the hill beneath it, ascending through 9 levels until the central stupa at its summit catches whatever light the sky is offering and holds it. Borobudur is the largest Buddhist monument in the world. It is also viewed from the only angle from which its true form becomes legible, a mandala. From directly above, which in the 9th century of the Common Era, when it was built, would have required either an extraordinary imagination or a flight that was not available to human beings, Borobudur reveals itself as a precise 3-dimensional rendering of the mandala diagram. A series of square terraces at its base, corresponding to the square inner palace of the classical mandala form, surrounded by 3 circular terraces near the summit, corresponding to the circular rings that bound the sacred interior space. The central stupa, rising at the apex, corresponds to the heart of the mandala, the seat of the principal deity. Moving through Borobudur is not simply a matter of climbing a monument. It is a practice. The pilgrim begins at the base, in the world of ordinary human experience, depicted in the relief carvings of the lowest gallery, and moves progressively upward and inward through depictions of the Bodhisattva path, the journey of those dedicated to the liberation of all beings, through successive levels of refinement until arriving at the circular terraces, where the stone stupas contain seated Buddha figures visible through their latticed walls, and finally at the central stupa at the summit, which is empty, representing the state of awakened mind beyond all form and concept. The building is a mandala. Walking through it is meditating through it. Angkor Wat in Cambodia, built in the 12th century and dedicated originally to the Hindu god Vishnu before being rededicated to Buddhist use, is organized according to the same essential principle. Its ground plan is a mandala, with the central tower of the main sanctuary corresponding to the cosmic mountain called Mount Meru in both Hindu and Buddhist cosmology, understood as the axis of the universe, the still point around which all of creation revolves. The outer walls of Angkor Wat represent the mountains at the edge of the world. The moat surrounding the entire complex represents the primordial ocean. Standing inside Angkor Wat, one is, by the architecture's intention, standing at the center of the universe. Mount Meru, understood in both Hindu and Buddhist cosmology as the vertical axis at the center of existence, is the architectural counterpart of the Bindu, the central point of the yantra, the heart of the mandala. Every sacred building that takes the mandala as its organizing principle is, in a sense, built around an imaginary Mount Meru, a vertical axis connecting the earthly and the divine, the human and the cosmic, the constructed and the infinite. The spire, the stupa, the dome. These architectural forms, wherever they appear in the traditions influenced by Indian cosmology, are all attempting the same thing. They are pointing upward from the center. The medieval city of Mandala in Myanmar, founded in the year 1857 by King Mindon, was deliberately planned according to Mandala principles. Its name is not coincidental. The royal palace was placed at the center of the city, with the city radiating outward from that center according to the traditional Buddhist cosmological geometry that had organized sacred space in the region for centuries. The palace, like the deity at the heart of a painted mandala, was the center from which all of the city's structure was derived. In Japan, where the Shingon Buddhist tradition brought by Kukai in the 9th century expressed its understanding of the cosmos through two complementary mandalas, the womb world and the diamond world, entire monastery complexes were sometimes laid out to reflect these mandalas spatially. Moving through such a complex, from the outer buildings toward the inner sanctuaries, was understood as a form of mandala practice, a physical journey that mirrored and supported the interior journey of meditation. The monastery was not simply a place where practice happened. It was itself a form of practice, its architecture an expression of the same principles that the painted mandalas hung on its walls were expressing through image and color. The remarkable fact about all of these built mandalas is that they were not designed to be seen from above. Their creators lived before the age of flight, before aerial photography, before satellite imagery. The mandala form encoded in their ground plans was not visible to any human eye from ground level. It was encoded for a different kind of perception, perhaps for the perception of the deities who were understood to inhabit the space. Perhaps simply because a building whose geometry corresponds to a sacred diagram is, by that correspondence alone, understood to be sanctified in a way that a building without such correspondence is not. Perhaps because the builders knew, with a certainty that left no room for doubt, that the form of the world they were constructing mattered independently of whether anyone could see it. And perhaps that understanding points towards something that requires no architecture at all to appreciate. Because the mandala form, it turns out, does not wait to be built. It is already present in the natural world, in forms so abundant and so precise that the human tradition of sacred geometry begins to look less like an invention and more like a recognition. Long before any human hand traced a circle in sand or ground a pigment into a radial pattern on a wall, the mandala was already present. It was present in the water that crystallizes around a central point in the first cold air of winter. It was present in the shell of the single-celled organism drifting through an ocean that existed before any organism complex enough to observe it. It was present in the web of the spider, in the cross-section of the tree, in the eye of the storm, in the flower opening toward whatever light was available. The mandala, considered as a geometric form, is not a human invention. It is a human recognition. The snowflake is perhaps the most familiar and most perfect of all natural mandalas. When water vapor freezes, it crystallizes around a central point and always does so with six-fold radial symmetry. 6 arms reaching outward from the center, each arm a mirror image of the one beside it. Each snowflake's particular shape determined by the specific atmospheric conditions through which it fell. No two in all of human history exactly alike, and yet every one of them a mandala. The geometry is not imposed by any external requirement. It emerges from the physics of water molecules, finding their most stable arrangement around a central crystallization point. Nature, in producing the snowflake, is solving a structural problem. The mandala is the solution. The web of an orb weaver spider is another instance of the same essential form, arrived at through completely different means. The spider begins at a central anchor point and spins radiating threads outward in all directions, then connects those threads with a continuous spiral that moves from the outside inward toward the center. The result is a structure of considerable geometric precision, a wheel of silk threads organized around a still center, perfectly functional as a trap for insects and perfectly beautiful as an example of radial symmetry built without calculation. The spider does not know what a mandala is. It simply builds the most efficient structure available to it, and the most efficient structure available turns out to be the one that sacred geometry has been describing for thousands of years. The cross-section of a tree trunk displays concentric rings centered on the original point of growth, each ring recording 1 year of the tree's expansion outward from its beginning. A tree cut in its 100th year shows 100 rings, each one the mandala's age in wood. The tree's entire history made legible by looking inward toward the center. The rings vary in thickness, recording lean years and abundant ones, droughts and wet seasons, the tree's long conversation with its particular patch of climate. But the geometry remains consistent, concentric circles around a fixed point, the center the oldest part, the outside the youngest, time moving outward from the origin. The eye of a hurricane, viewed from above as only satellite imagery allows, produces a circular structure of extraordinary scale. A calm center, surrounded by a rotating wall of cloud and wind that can extend hundreds of miles in every direction. The storm rotates around its eye with a precision that, from sufficient altitude, resembles nothing so much as the ring structures of a painted mandala, the calm center corresponding to the heart of the sacred image, the rotating bands of cloud corresponding to the concentric rings of fire and vajra and lotus that surround it. The hurricane does not arrange itself this way because any entity organized it. It arranges itself this way because the physics of rotating atmospheric systems on a rotating planet produces this geometry as inevitably as freezing water produces the six-armed snowflake. In the world of microbiology, diatoms stand as perhaps the most startling instance of natural mandala formation. Diatoms are single-celled algae found in both fresh and salt water, in soils and in ice, in nearly every aquatic environment on the planet. They construct shells of silica, the same material as glass, around themselves, and these shells, which can be observed only under magnification, exhibit radial symmetry of extraordinary precision and variety. There are tens of thousands of known species of diatoms, and each species produces a shell with its own particular mandala geometry. some with twofold symmetry, some with threefold, many with the fourfold and sixfold radial patterns most familiar from human mandala traditions. Scientists who study diatoms describe their shells as among the most geometrically complex structures in the natural world, produced by a single cell that has no nervous system, no intention, and no aesthetic sense. They are simply the most stable arrangement available. The independent recurrence of this radial, center-oriented geometry across such different scales and such different natural processes, from the molecular level of water crystallization to the atmospheric scale of a hurricane, from the silk threads of a spider to the silica shell of a microscopic alga, has been noted by scholars working across both the natural sciences and the humanities as evidence of something worth attending to. The mandala form does not seem to be arbitrary. It seems to correspond to a recurring solution to recurring structural problems across the natural world. The problem of how to build something stable around a center, how to distribute structure evenly from a point, how to organize extension without losing the coherence of origin. That the human sacred traditions which independently developed the mandala in so many different cultures and so many different centuries were responding to this same deep pattern, finding in the natural world a form that their own most concentrated and serious visual thinking was also discovering, suggests a possibility that is difficult to state precisely, but impossible to ignore entirely. Perhaps the mandala was not invented by the human imagination. Perhaps it was recognized by it, the way one recognizes something glimpsed before in a different light, the thing familiar before one can say from where. It was precisely this quality of prior familiarity, of something already known encountering itself in unexpected places, that led one of the most unusual minds of the 20th century to spend years studying the mandala as a psychological rather than a religious phenomenon, and to arrive at conclusions that changed how Western culture thought about the inner life. Carl Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist, a student, and then a rival of Sigmund Freud, a man whose intellectual ambitions were so large that the theoretical framework he eventually built to contain them had to accommodate not only the clinical evidence he gathered across decades of practice, but the mythology of ancient cultures, the iconography of medieval alchemy, the sacred art of traditions his European education had barely acknowledged, and the spontaneous visual productions of his own dreaming mind. He was not, by the standards of empirical science, an easy thinker to categorize, but he was, by almost any measure, an extraordinarily attentive one. Jung began drawing circular diagrams spontaneously during what he later described as the most difficult and disorienting period of his life, a prolonged personal and intellectual crisis that began around 1913, following his break with Freud, and extended through the years of the First World War. Every morning during this period, he would draw a small circular image in his notebook, what he called a small round daily thing, without planning what it would contain. The drawings that emerged were center-oriented, radially symmetric, and varied in their internal complexity from day to day in a way that Jung began to notice corresponded to his own interior state. On days of greater clarity, the drawings were more ordered. On days of confusion or distress, they reflected that disturbance in their geometry. This observation grew over years of private attention into a broader theory. Jung began to notice that the patients who came to him for analysis often produced in their dream imagery and in their spontaneous artwork, circular, center-oriented images of a similar character. These images appeared not only in the work of patients familiar with Eastern religious traditions, but in those who had no exposure to such traditions at all. A middle-aged European woman with no knowledge of Tibetan Buddhism would dream of a circular diagram with a luminous center. An elderly man would, in the late stages of a long analysis, begin drawing images whose structure closely resembled the yantras of Hindu practice that he had never encountered. Jung came to believe, through the accumulation of this clinical evidence alongside his study of Tibetan, Hindu, and other Mandala traditions, that the mandala represented in visual form what he called the archetype of the self, the totality of the psyche, including both its conscious and unconscious dimensions, the organizing principle beneath all of the personality's varied and sometimes contradictory expressions. The circle, he proposed, is a universal symbol of wholeness, and the center of the mandala is the archetype of the self, because it is from the center that the organization of all other elements radiates, and it is toward the center that all of the circle's contents are ultimately oriented. The circle, in Jung's framework, appears spontaneously in human symbolic production because the psyche is, in some meaningful sense, structured as a mandala, organized around a center that gives coherence to all the varied contents of conscious and unconscious life, a center that most people never consciously encounter, but that organizes their experience nonetheless. The work of what Jung called individuation, the lifelong psychological journey toward integrating the disparate and often contradictory elements of the self into a more complete and self-aware whole, was, in his view, a journey toward that center, and the mandala was the symbol the psyche spontaneously produced when that journey was underway. Jung drew on an impressively wide range of sources in developing and supporting this framework. He consulted translations of Tibetan Buddhist texts, including the Tibetan Book of the Dead, a collection of guidance for the dying and newly dead that he considered one of the most psychologically sophisticated documents he had ever encountered. He studied Hindu yantra traditions, Chinese cosmological diagrams, and the circular imagery found in medieval European alchemy, the tradition of philosophical and practical experimentation that preceded modern chemistry and produced, in its manuscripts and texts, a remarkable body of circular and center-oriented symbolic imagery that Jung considered an independent Western instance of the same psychological dynamics he was observing in his consulting room. His 1944 work, Psychology and Alchemy, was, in part, an extended argument for the psychological significance of this alchemical mandala imagery. It contained reproductions of medieval circular diagrams, analyzed through his psychological framework, sitting alongside images from Eastern traditions, as evidence for a universal symbolic language of the psyche that crossed cultural and historical boundaries. Whether or not one finds Jung's theoretical framework persuasive, the sheer variety of mandala forms he gathered and set in conversation with one another represents one of the most ambitious comparative studies of sacred geometry that Western scholarship has produced. Jung's work had a lasting practical consequence. It gave the mandala a home in Western psychological practice and helped establish the framework within which art therapists would later use mandala creation as a clinical tool. Those who came after him, working in the field of art therapy that emerged in the mid-20th century, drew directly on his insight that the act of creating a center-oriented circular image could access psychological material that ordinary verbal exchange might not reach, and that the image produced in such an act could reflect the creator's interior condition in ways that both creator and therapist might find illuminating. The mandala entered the hospital, the clinic, and the therapy studio, carrying something of the concentration and the interior pointing quality it had carried for centuries in the monastery and the temple, translated now into the secular vocabulary of psychological practice. And the same traditions of concentrated, center-oriented sacred art that so interested Jung, the traditions of sand painting and ceremonial sacred diagrams created and destroyed in service of healing, appear not only in the Asian traditions he studied most closely. They appear with striking structural parallels and completely independent origins in the desert cultures of the American Southwest. In the high desert country of what is now the southwestern United States, in a landscape of red rock and wide sky that inspires a particular quality of human attention, the Navajo people have created sand paintings for healing and ceremonial purposes for centuries. These paintings share with the Tibetan sand mandala a cluster of structural features so striking that scholars who first noticed the resemblance struggled to account for it. Both traditions create images of extraordinary precision from colored sand applied to a flat surface. Both organize their images around a central point with radial symmetry, and both traditions deliberately destroy their creations upon the completion of the ceremony that gave rise to them. The explanation for these parallel features is not a shared origin. Scholars are in agreement that the Navajo sand painting tradition and the Tibetan sand mandala tradition developed entirely independently of one another in cultures separated by thousands of miles and without any documented historical contact. The similarities are a cross-cultural parallel, two traditions arriving at similar solutions to similar questions about how to use visual form in the service of healing and sacred intention, simply because the solutions are effective. Navajo sand painting ceremonies are called sings or chantways, a name that reflects the centrality of sung prayer to the tradition. They are conducted by a specialist called a hatali, a Navajo word that translates roughly as singer and refers to the individual trained across years of study and apprenticeship to perform the ceremonial healing practices of the tradition. The hatali is at once a medical practitioner, a ceremonial specialist, and a keeper of complex traditional knowledge covering hundreds of chants, prayers, and sand painting designs, each associated with specific healing purposes. A chantway ceremony may last between 1 and 9 nights, with different sand paintings created on different nights corresponding to different stages of the healing process. The patient for whom the ceremony is conducted sits at the center of the sand painting at a particular moment in the ceremony, physically occupying the central sacred space of the image in a way that brings the painting's healing power into direct contact with the person who needs it. This direct physical relationship between the patient and the sacred image is one of the features that most clearly distinguishes the Navajo sand painting's use from the more contemplative relationship that characterizes most mandala practice in Buddhist traditions. The sand paintings are created on the floor of a ceremonial space typically a hogan, the traditional Navajo home, using dry pigments made from natural materials, ground minerals, plant pollens, charcoal, and cornmeal, the colors produced by the landscape itself. The images are drawn freehand, without guidelines or measuring instruments, by the Hatali and their assistants, working according to designs held in memory across years of training. The sand is applied by pinching small amounts between the fingers and allowing it to flow in controlled streams, a technique that produces images of remarkable precision, despite the absence of any mechanical aids. Like Tibetan sand mandalas, the Navajo sand paintings are destroyed upon the completion of their ceremonial function. The sand is carefully swept up and removed, often disposed of in a specific location, appropriate to the tradition's understanding of how sacred materials should be returned to the natural world. The destruction is not incidental, it is essential. The painting is a vehicle for the ceremony, and when the ceremony is complete, the vehicle has served its purpose. Maintaining it beyond that purpose would be, in the tradition's understanding, not a preservation of something valuable, but a misunderstanding of what the value was. The detailed imagery of traditional Navajo sand paintings is considered sacred, and the reproduction of specific designs in permanent media for commercial purposes has historically not been sanctioned within traditional practice. This has created a complex dynamic in recent decades as interest in Navajo art forms has grown among non-Navajo collectors and tourists, generating both economic opportunities and ongoing conversations within the Navajo Nation about how traditional knowledge should be shared, what aspects of it should remain restricted, and who has the authority to make these decisions. The sand painting tradition is, among other things, a reminder that sacred knowledge belongs to the communities that hold it, and that the conditions under which it can be shared are not determined by the appetites of outsiders. Other indigenous cultures have independently arrived at similarly circular, center-oriented sacred diagrams. Aboriginal Australians use circular patterns organized around a center in ceremonial contexts that have been maintained for tens of thousands of years, the longest continuous artistic tradition in human history. The circular form appears in the sand drawings made during ceremony, in body painting, and in the ochre designs applied to bark. Its meaning and function differ in detail from both the Tibetan and Navajo traditions, but its structural presence as a center-oriented organizing form connects it to the same fundamental pattern that appears across cultures and across centuries. That pattern, wherever it appears, seems to be doing something similar, creating a space marked as different from ordinary space, organizing that space around a center that concentrates meaning and power, and providing a framework within which healing, contemplation, or sacred action can occur. The mandala, in all its forms and in all its traditions, is, among other things, a technology of attention, a form designed to focus the wandering mind and bring it into contact with whatever that tradition understands as most real and most valuable at the center of things. It was in Japan, in a tradition introduced by a single extraordinary individual, that the mandala found perhaps its most philosophically sophisticated expression as both a visual and a spatial practice, a form of teaching that worked simultaneously as image, as architecture, and as the silence between sounds. When Kukai returned to Japan from China in the early 9th century of the Common Era, he brought with him more than 2 painted mandalas on silk. He brought the conviction that the esoteric Buddhist tradition he had received from his master Hui Guo represented something unique in the range of Buddhist teachings available in Japan at that time. A complete system of practice in which visual form, physical gesture, and sacred sound work together to transmit the totality of the Dharma in a way that transcended the limitations of verbal instruction alone. The 2 mandalas he brought were not decorations for the tradition he was founding. They were the tradition's heart, visible and portable and capable of transmission in a way that no text could be. The 2 mandalas are called the Taizokai and the Kongokai in Japanese, names that translate as the Womb World Mandala and the Diamond World Mandala. They are understood in Shingon Buddhism, the school Kukai founded, not as 2 separate teachings that happen to share a format, but as 2 faces of a single reality, the way the 2 sides of a coin are distinct from each other and inseparable from each other at once. The Taizokai, or Womb World Mandala, represents the universal principle of compassion. Its imagery is organized around the central figure of Mahavairocana, the cosmic Buddha, whose name means Great Illuminator, surrounded by radiating groups of deities, arranged in patterns that are more organic and flowing than strictly geometric, their arrangement suggesting the unfolding of compassion outward from its source, the way warmth unfolds from a fire. The Taizokai is associated with the potential for awakening that exists within all sentient beings, hidden and complete like an embryo within its womb, present from the beginning and waiting to be brought into manifestation through practice. The Kongokai, or Diamond World Mandala, represents the principle of wisdom. Its organization is more geometric and more abstract than the Taizokai, composed of 9 sub-mandalas arranged in a square grid, each sub-mandala depicting a different aspect of Mahavairocana's enlightened mind from a different perspective. The Kongokai is associated with the indestructibility of the awakened state, the quality of awareness that once fully realized cannot be diminished by anything the world presents. Diamond, in the tradition's imagery, means not hard in the brittle sense, but indestructible in the sense of being beyond the reach of any force that might seek to alter or destroy it. In Shingon teaching, the Taizokai and the Kongokai are not opposites. They are complements. Compassion and wisdom are understood not as 2 different qualities that sometimes come into tension, but as 2 aspects of a single enlightened reality, neither of which is complete without the other. Compassion without wisdom can be sentimental, responding to immediate suffering without understanding its causes. Wisdom without compassion can be cold, understanding the nature of suffering without being moved to address it. Together, they constitute the full expression of what the Shingon tradition calls Buddha nature, the enlightened mind that Shingon practice aims to reveal as already present in every practitioner. In Shingon ritual, both mandalas are traditionally displayed together in the same space, facing each other, so that the practitioner who enters the ritual space is received from both sides simultaneously, surrounded by wisdom and compassion in their visual forms. This spatial arrangement is itself a teaching. The practitioner is not approaching the mandalas from the outside, but is positioned between them, already inside the field they define. Kukai described the 2 mandalas as necessary tools of transmission precisely because, he taught, the complete truth of esoteric Buddhism could not be fully conveyed in language. Any description of awakened mind that can be expressed in words is, by that very fact, not yet the full reality it is pointing toward. The mandalas, in their visual completeness, their geometric precision, and the accumulated power of the initiatory lineage through which they were transmitted, could do something that words could not. They could be present with the practitioner in the silent space of meditation, offering their teaching without requiring the practitioner to process it verbally. In the temples where Shingon practice has continued uninterrupted since Kukai's time, the two mandalas are encountered in the context of a ritual practice involving precisely timed movements, the careful burning of incense and fire, the recitation of mantras in a pronunciation that the tradition has preserved across more than a millennium, and the reception of the teacher's physical touch as a form of transmission. The mandalas are the visual anchor of this multisensory practice, the still point around which all the other elements organize themselves. In Zen Buddhism, which arrived in Japan through a different lineage and developed along different lines than Shingon, the mandala principle manifests in ways that are harder to see immediately because they are deliberately more austere. There are no elaborate painted diagrams of multiple deities in the Zen tradition's typical visual vocabulary. But the circular enso, the single brushstroke of ink forming an open or closed circle, that is perhaps the most iconic image in Zen art, is understood within the tradition as a direct expression of awakened mind, complete, immediate, and requiring nothing added to be what it is. It is the mandala stripped to its essence, a circle, a center implied by the circle's form, and nothing else. The teacher who brushes an enso in a single movement of the wrist is not decorating a page. The teacher is making a statement about the nature of mind that the mandala tradition in all its forms has been making across the entire span of its history. And that statement, carried from Japan back westward through the work of scholars and monks and one particular Swiss psychiatrist, eventually arrived in places its originators could never have imagined it would go. Into the stained glass of Gothic cathedrals, into the stone floors of medieval churches, into the illuminated manuscripts of Christian mystics who had never heard the word mandala and would not have recognized it, but who were nonetheless making, in their own sacred traditions, something that corresponded in its essential form to what the monks of Asia had been making for 1,000 years before them. In the summer light of northern France, the rose window of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris does something that is difficult to prepare for, even if one has seen photographs. The light enters through the colored glass and organizes itself in the interior of the cathedral according to the window's geometry, radiating outward from its circular center, falling in pools of red and blue and gold on the stone floor below, the colors moving slowly across the pavement as the sun moves through the sky outside. The window is 13 meters in diameter. It dates to the 13th century, and it is, in its essential structure, a mandala. Rose windows, large circular stained glass windows with radiating geometric symmetry, appear in Gothic cathedrals across France, Germany, England, Spain, and Italy, products of the extraordinary burst of cathedral building that swept medieval Europe between approximately 1100 and 1300 of the Common Era. Art historians and theologians have written extensively about these windows, noting their structural correspondence to the mandala form, a center, radiating symmetry, a containing circular boundary, and an iconographic program that moves from the most sacred content at the center toward more peripheral material at the edges. The resemblance is not incidental. It reflects the same underlying understanding that gave rise to the Buddhist and Hindu mandala, that the sacred is concentrated at the center, and that the appropriate visual expression of the sacred is a form that organizes all of its content in relation to that center. The medieval Christian tradition did not have a word for what it was making. It called these windows by descriptive names related to their flower-like forms. But the theological understanding they embodied was consistent with what the Mandala traditions of Asia had been expressing for centuries, that the divine presence is located at the center of all things, and that the act of directing attention toward that center is itself a form of prayer. The labyrinth at Chartres Cathedral, inlaid in the stone floor of the nave and dating to approximately 1220 of the Common Era, approaches the mandala from a different angle. It is not a static image to be looked at, but a path to be walked. The Chartres labyrinth is a single continuous path, approximately 260 meters long, folded back on itself in a pattern that moves the walker progressively inward toward the center through a series of circuits that cover every section of the circular space before arriving at the central rose-shaped chamber. Walking the labyrinth at a slow and meditative pace takes approximately 45 minutes, during which the walker moves through the same circular space repeatedly without retracing any steps, the circuitous route ensuring that nothing of the circle's territory is left unvisited. Scholars who have studied both the Chartres labyrinth and the Mandala meditation practices of Tibetan Buddhism have noted that the two share a functional purpose that their surface appearances might not immediately suggest. Both are technologies of attention, structured forms that guide the wandering mind by providing a sufficiently complex path or image to occupy its tendency to scatter, while simultaneously and gradually orienting it toward a center that carries the practice's essential meaning. The walker who reaches the center of the Chartres labyrinth has, in the physical act of walking, undergone a version of the same inward movement that the Tibetan practitioner undertakes in the mental act of visualizing their way through the rings and gates of a painted mandala. Celtic knotwork, the intricate woven patterns found in illuminated manuscripts, carved stone crosses, and metalwork throughout early medieval Ireland and Britain from roughly the 5th through the 12th centuries of the Common Era, incorporates a quality of radial organization that scholars of both art history and sacred geometry have noted as consistent with mandala principles. The great wheel crosses of early Irish Christianity, carved from single massive stones, present a circle containing a cross at their center. The circle and the cross together creating a form that organizes all of the stone's surface in relation to the central intersection. These crosses do not look like Tibetan mandalas, but they are doing something structurally similar, marking a center, organizing a boundary, and placing the most sacred element at the crossing point from which all other elements radiate. The 12th century German abbess, composer, scientist, and mystic Hildegard of Bingen produced a body of visionary illuminated illustrations that scholars of sacred art have consistently noted as among the most remarkable Western instances of the mandala form. Working from direct visionary experience that she described in clinical and literary detail, Hildegard created illustrations of her visions that organized complex symbolic content around luminous circular centers, the entire composition radiating outward from a point of concentrated light. She had no knowledge of Tibetan or Hindu mandala traditions. She was not making mandalas in any intentional sense. She was simply drawing what she saw in her visions, and what she saw was organized again and again as a center surrounded by concentric radiating structures of meaning. It was Carl Jung who first systematically noted this Western parallel tradition and connected it to the Eastern mandala forms he was studying simultaneously. In his analysis of medieval alchemical manuscripts, produced by the European tradition of philosophical and practical experimentation that preceded modern chemistry and drew extensively on classical, Arab, and Christian sources, Jung encountered circular cosmological diagrams of striking structural similarity to both Buddhist and Hindu mandalas. These diagrams appeared independently, in texts whose authors had no access to Eastern traditions, generated by the European philosophical imagination, working on questions about the nature of matter, spirit, and their transformation. Questions that turned out to produce, when pursued with sufficient depth and visual sophistication, something that looked remarkably like what the Asian traditions had been producing for 1,000 years, for entirely different explicit reasons. This convergence, arriving at the same essential form from such different starting points and through such different intellectual paths, is one of the most interesting puzzles that the mandala's global history presents. Either the form corresponds to something universal in the way human minds organize sacred meaning and direct attention toward what they consider most real, or the convergences are less meaningful than they appear. The traditions themselves have generally favored the first interpretation, finding in the mandala's global presence a confirmation of its depth rather than a dilution of its particularity. And that depth, that capacity to do its essential work across so many different cultural contexts, is perhaps most evident in the place where the mandala currently lives most actively. Not in monasteries or cathedrals, but in the quiet, everyday life of people who have never set foot in either. Something interesting happened to the mandala in the early years of the 21st century. It appeared in large quantities in the stationery section. It materialized on the shelves of bookshops in the form of coloring books printed on heavy paper and marketed to adults under the general heading of mindfulness, stress relief, and creative relaxation. It appeared in school classrooms as an art activity recommended by teachers looking for ways to support students' emotional regulation. It arrived in hospital art therapy studios as a clinical tool recommended by therapists working with anxiety, trauma, and chronic illness. The mandala, which had spent the previous 3,000 years in temples and monasteries and scholars' studies, entered the everyday. Mandala coloring books became one of the best-selling categories in publishing during the middle years of the second decade of the 21st century, driven by a broader cultural interest in mindfulness practices that was itself driven by the accumulating evidence that sustained attention practices have measurable effects on the human nervous system. The people who bought these books were not, for the most part, practitioners of Tibetan Buddhism or Hindu Tantra. Many of them had no particular religious affiliation and no prior interest in sacred geometry. They were simply people who found, often to their own surprise, that sitting quietly and filling in the sections of a complex circular image with colored pencils produced something they had not expected. A reduction in the sense of urgency that characterized their ordinary experience, a quietening of the mental commentary that typically accompanied their days, something that resembled, without quite being, the quality of mind that contemplative practitioners across many traditions have been cultivating for centuries. The researchers who have studied this phenomenon have found results consistent with what those practitioners might have predicted. Several published studies in the art therapy literature have found that creating or coloring mandalas is associated with greater reductions in anxiety, measured through both self-report and physiological markers, compared with unstructured coloring or drawing geometric shapes without the mandala's center-oriented form. The specific feature of the mandala that appears to account for this effect is not simply the act of coloring or the time spent in quiet activity, but something particular to the center-oriented form. The way it provides the wandering mind with a continuous path back to a central point, gently and repeatedly drawing attention inward without requiring any deliberate effort on the part of the person engaged with it. This is, of course, precisely what every tradition that has worked with mandalas has said about them for centuries. The mandala is a technology of attention. It does not require understanding to do its work. It requires only that one sit with it long enough to feel the pull of its center. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition of creating public sand mandalas at museums, universities, and cultural centers in the West is another form through which the mandala entered contemporary life in a more directly traditional guise. Beginning in the 1980s, as Tibetan Buddhist teachers sought to share their tradition with Western audiences, and as Western institutions became increasingly interested in hosting living representatives of threatened cultural traditions, teams of Tibetan monks began traveling to cultural institutions across Europe and North America to create sand mandalas in public view over the course of days or weeks. These public creations introduced millions of non-Buddhist viewers to the practice in a form that no book or photograph could quite replicate. The experience of watching monks create a sand mandala in person, of seeing the precision of the process up close, of spending an afternoon watching a composition of extraordinary beauty slowly take form, grain by grain under the guidance of trained hands, is consistently described by those who have had it as among the most quietly absorbing experiences of their lives. The mandala's capacity to slow time, to draw attention into a particular quality of focused, unhurried presence, does not require doctrinal understanding to operate. It operates on everyone. And then, of course, comes the moment when it is swept away, which consistently produces, in observers who have watched the creation over days, and feel something like ownership of the resulting beauty, a response that is difficult to articulate, but easy to recognize. Something that is not quite grief and not quite acceptance, but partakes of both. Something that the tradition identifies as the beginning of understanding. The mandala's journey from the painted manuscripts of ancient India to the coloring books of the 21st century is not a story of dilution or degradation. It is the story of a form so fundamentally useful, so accurately calibrated to the needs of the wandering human mind, that it has found its way into every context where those needs are present and the form is available to meet them. The needs are the same across centuries and cultures. The need for a center to return to, the need for a form that gathers scattered attention into something coherent, the need for an experience that connects the ordinary activity of a quiet afternoon to something larger and more still. The mandala offers all of these things in its most elaborate form, in the hands of a team of Tibetan monks working over 2 weeks in a museum gallery, and in its simplest form, in the hands of a person sitting at a kitchen table with a colored pencil on a Tuesday evening. Both are genuine encounters with the same essential form. Both are, in their different ways and to their different degrees, containers of essence. What the mandala has preserved across its long and various history is not a single doctrine or a single aesthetic or a single set of cultural associations. What it has preserved is the understanding that the center matters, that the act of orienting toward it, whatever form it takes, and whatever name the tradition that cultivates it gives to what lies there, is among the most fundamentally human and most consistently worthwhile activities available to a human life. That a circle drawn around a point is not simply a shape, it is an argument, a quiet, patient, and remarkably durable argument about what the world looks like when the attention is properly directed. And that argument, carried in sand and silk and stone and glass, and the memory of 1,000 years of teachers and students, is still being made tonight, in one form or another, wherever anyone has the patience to find the center and sit with it long enough to feel what it offers. As we come gently to the end of our time inside the circle, let the whole of what we have traveled through settle for a moment before it fades. We began with a single word and found a world inside it. We watched the mandala move from the oldest hymns of an ancient civilization through the painted silk of Tibet and the carved stone of Java and the stained glass of a cathedral in northern France. We sat with monks pressing sand through metal funnels for 2 weeks and then sweeping all of it away in an afternoon. We walked through temples built as mandalas, looked up at windows that have been organizing light into sacred geometry since the 13th century, and followed the form into the dreaming mind of a Swiss psychiatrist who drew circles every morning before the rest of the world was awake. We found the mandala in snowflakes and spider webs, in the silica shells of creatures too small to see, in the slow concentric record of a tree's expansion from its first moment of growth. We found it in the desert sand ceremonies of the Navajo, in the brushstroke of a Zen teacher forming a single circle in ink and saying nothing further, in the stone floor of a French cathedral where pilgrims have walked a circular path toward a center for 800 years. And underneath all of it, one idea ran quietly from the beginning to the end, that the center is not incidental, that orienting toward one, returning to one, finding one in the middle of an ordinary day or an ordinary evening, is among the most ancient and most human things there is to do. You do not need to hold any of what you heard tonight. The mind will keep what it needs, the way the river carries what the sand releases. Let the rings and the gates and the lotus petals and the rose windows and the slow footsteps through a cathedral nave begin to soften at their edges now. Let your jaw unclench. Let your shoulders release whatever they have been carrying. Let your hands rest exactly where they are. If these quiet journeys into the world's oldest and most carefully held ideas are something you return to, The sleepy mind is always here. A like, a subscription, or a thought left in the comments helps more tired and curious people find their way to this particular stillness, one gentle night at a time. This channel exists because of the people who find something worth returning to in these unhurried evenings together. And if sleep has not yet arrived, there is another door waiting on the screen, another slow world ready to receive you. But if your eyes are heavy now, let them close. Let the mandala fade the way a mandala is meant to fade. From the outside inward, the rings dissolving first, then the palace walls, then the gates, and finally the center itself, releasing into something that is not emptiness, but the quiet that